This is a video dedicated to helping those who may have difficulty sometimes, who struggle with writing a written response to an essay question that's on an exam. And of course, I'm focusing in on how to write an essay question for a philosophy exam. And first thing, and I know it might seem silly, but you need to read the question carefully. Calm yourself down enough to read the question carefully, and then be sure to answer everything that's asked of you. So don't miss points due to neglecting parts of the question. Often questions will have several parts, or at least two parts, and make sure that you address all the things that are being asked. And be sure to answer the question that's being asked. Sometimes people jump to an assumption that the question's about one thing when it's really about a different aspect of that topic. So some might see a name of a person or a theory and just start talking about that person or that theory without actually addressing the question that is being asked. So you need to avoid doing that. Now, if you're asked to describe an argument, which would be a common task in a philosophy exam, it's fine to go ahead and write the numbered premises and the conclusion if that was presented in a lecture. Okay, if you've memorized that, you can do that, but you would have to have the whole thing memorized well to do that typically. It's even better, though, to demonstrate that you understand the argument through your own words, to put it in your own words where you are capturing the connection between the premises and the conclusion. And make sure that you include both of those aspects of an argument. Make sure you include the premises and the conclusion. And just another side tip here, or a sub-tip, a question with the phrase, "explain why," or some other similar phrases, is going to be asking you to provide an argument. So that's when you need to make sure that you are connecting ideas together the way that arguments do. Now, if you're asked for a definition, typically that might just be a portion of an essay question, but it certainly could be included in an essay question. Do your best to memorize when you're preparing for the exam, as you're given important definitions. Make sure you memorize some terms and phrases like validity or happiness on a lecture on John Stuart Mill or Aristotle, or free action on a lecture on an author writing on free will, where they're defining that phrase. And so when those are provided, when definitions are provided, and especially when those definitions are repeated in a lecture, and then especially when I refer you back to those definitions, it's probably a clue that you should just go ahead and memorize the definitions, or at least have the phrases that are significant in capturing the idea. Only a few definitions need to be completely memorized in a very strict way. Validity would be one of those, but many other definitions have some leeway with your own phrasing that would be acceptable, as long as you're capturing the idea of the author. And be prepared to provide examples, or at least recognize examples that would demonstrate that you have an understanding of terms or phrases that are presented in a philosophical theory. And be prepared to provide your own views, that is, when you are asked to do so. So sometimes questions might ask you for an evaluation of a theory or idea. Usually they would ask you to provide the theory, show that you understand it, and then just a little bit about what you think about it. So you should be ready to do that. Now, if the question is about what the theory is, or what the idea is, or what the argument is, then don't just jump into your own evaluation, because if that's all the question is asking, and it's not asking you to provide an evaluation, your own evaluation typically detracts from your response. Okay, some broad general principles. about preparing for exams and what to expect. Be prepared to provide an overview of the lecture. So any given lecture, you should be able to provide a succinct description of the main arguments included in that lecture, and certainly of the main points from that lecture. So as you're viewing a video, as you're listening to a lecture in class, make sure that you're capturing, thinking about the major points so that you go back and study those. And if you are taking an exam and you can't remember the answer to an essay question, just go ahead, move on. If you're drawing a complete blank, you just go to other parts of the exam, return to the essay question, as long as you remember to do that. And you may be reminded about that, what you could say for an answer by another question. So often if there might be an essay question, and then at another part of the exam, there might be a multiple choice question or a true false question that might prompt your memory and help you answer that essay question that you initially just couldn't remember. And so this is helpful to skip a question when you're completely blank. That's okay. Just remember, be careful to go back to it and answer it later. All right, another set of general principles. If you draw a complete blank, and this is something I referred to earlier, if you have a complete blank, all right, maybe saying something true about the topic would help get you a point or two, right? Don't BS, it's not going to help. But if you remember something that is true, that is related to the topic, at least write that. You might get a point or two, where if you left it blank, you have no chance of getting any points. And another just tip about listening to lectures and studying, when a story is told in a lecture, which occurs often, make sure you know why it's being told, right? Be sure you know how it relates to the topic at hand. So usually a story is told to support a premise, or to illustrate a theory, or to help you understand a definition. And you might be asked about the purpose of a story, especially if it's a longer story that I've gone through details with during a lecture. Make sure that you understand why these stories are told. It's not merely for entertainment. It is with a purpose. And be sure to be very familiar with lists. When you see a list presented in a lecture, when you see a list in one of your readings, make sure that you are familiar with those. You might be asked to provide examples. You might have an essay question which will say, give 4 examples of. Or you might have a multiple choice question and you need to rule something out that wasn't initially included on the list to show that you are familiar with that list. So when a list is presented in a reading, in a lecture, make sure you're really familiar with that so that you can address any questions that may be asked about it. I hope this was a helpful way of dealing with essay questions on exams, and be sure that you are careful to study as you go. As you are presented with new material, make sure you're studying as you're going along so that you're ready and don't have to cram, because that is too challenging to do for a philosophy exam.